And so what's become clear to me is that in the space of just 4 years, my independence as a journalist, my ability to get information out there in my little niche area, has enormously changed. And that from now on, as long as I'm able to maintain some sort of audience and some sort of profile, I needn't be tied to any employer or any media organisation. That's why I recently blogged that those journalists which are agreeing to in some way give up or limit their rights to use social media are really being very foolish, because it guarantees your invisibility in the future and it also ties your presence to your employer. I actually think the right to use social media within normal limits applicable to public forums is actually an industrial issue for journalists. However, my ability to get the information out there, of course, isn't the end of the story. How do I get paid for it? I'm a professional journalist. I get paid by crikey both to blog and to write for the email. And the truth is that I probably wouldn't put myself offside with so many of my former colleagues if I wasn't paid to do it. And the truth is that if I unleashed myself from the crikey presence, I probably wouldn't get paid, or certainly not as much. Not that crikey pays a huge amount, does it, Boss?
Later, you two.
And I think this is the key. I think in the future journalism is going to be not so much a profession but a practice. I think there will be many more people who are doing it as part of their lives and as part of their professional and social presence. But there are some kinds of journalism which won't be done consistently unless people are paid for it. Any journalism educator, and there's a few of them in the audience, will know that the most difficult thing to do with student journalists is to get them to ring people up, cold call them, just ring them and ask them for an interview, particularly to ask them rude questions and to make them angry. Why would you do that? It's actually incredibly hard work, and it doesn't really get much easier as you get older and more experienced. And so one of the key questions, and I know that everybody who's been asked this question so far, including Mark Scott, has said, well, I don't really know the answer, I don't pretend to either, is how are we going to use all these tools, but also ensure that the practice of journalism, whether or not it's done by full-time journalists, is sufficiently resourced for the nasty and dirty part of the work to still get done. I'm just going to talk briefly about the Foundation for Public Interest Journalism, which has been recently established within Swinburne University of Technology. I'm the chair, and Jonathan Green's also on our board with several others. We have a very wide brief from the university to explore ways of using new technology, first of all to try and identify what's worthwhile and good about journalism as it has been practiced and to try to carry that forward, but also to try and change the way journalism itself is done in good ways using the new technology. I'm getting the wind up, so I won't go into any more detail, but anybody who wants to know more is welcome to DM me or indeed send me a tweet, and I will send you our website details and our most recent media releases. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Margaret Simons. I didn't feel guilty at all winding you up because I knew you had all those avenues out there to get the message out, so I wasn't worried at all. Robin Williams is a presenter with ABC Radio National Science Show.
Thank you. I'm delighted to come here to talk once more about karaoke journalism.
Here we go.
As I've called it. First, a quote from the Spectator, which Mark Scott required us to read every week as soon as he joined the ABC. This is a column written by Ron Liddell, who used to be the executive producer of the British Today programme, equivalent to Breakfast. He says, "We have lots of columnists now because this is how things are. The good stuff about journalism, reportage, has been left behind, bullied out of existence by the internet, which, ironically, itself is useless for accurate, intelligent reportage, but that's another story. Instead, we have this moronic inferno, a high-pitched fugue of endlessly self-referential squeaking, the sonnet of 1,000 bewildered but nonetheless blithely confident pipistrel bats, all mothless." One of the reasons I like being rude about the new technology is that people get so cross, especially blokes. They all foam when they hear I don't have a mobile phone. One of the reasons I enjoy that as well is for the following proportions. For 5,000 discussions we have about new technologies, a third of them about why they've failed. We might have 1,000 on doing more with less, 100 on staffing problems, 50 on new editorial restrictions, and 2 on writing skills and production values. I think that proportion is probably wrong in practice. We should possibly reverse the order. And that made me extremely happy because, frankly, between ourselves, as Philip Adams might say, no one else is listening, we actually went very readily with the new technologies when we found out how they might work. For instance, in the science unit, we went first with podcasting, and it's been fantastic. We went very early on, actually in 1972, they told me, the first phone-ins on ABC Radio, using a field telephone from the army, which didn't really work, but that was fun. With no delay, people swore. We've also used ways in which you have highly produced programs which then could exist in various other shorter forms, so that you can have 1-minute versions or even tinier versions. So we're happy to use anything to multiply the effect, but to reduce the cacophony. And at the moment we're doing experiments with having science shows which are there normally on Radio National, but then are augmented by local radio with Twitter, and certainly feedback on the kind of email extensions of the websites and so on, so that we can then report quite quickly in a distilled way what people are saying. However, the most important thing as I'm concerned, in conjunction with the new technology, whatever you call it, is that we reverse the kind of trend that's been reported, for instance, by John Birmingham in the Monthly the other day. 26,000 jobs have disappeared in the American media in the past 2 years. In Australia, Fairfax has let go of 550 staff, and News Corporation at least 100 journos. No one seems to be giving enough thought to what's happening to them and their replacement, the new generation. We in the Science Unit, whilst being very happy to look at the new technology, are also concerned about the kids and how hiring them can make us as exciting broadcasters and Twitterers as any other single thing. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Robin. Robin Williams. And our final panellist is Jonathan Green. Jonathan is the editor of Crikey.
The first thing to say is how much we've enjoyed Margaret's time as a media contributor at Crikey. It's been good, and she's done valuable service and given us good work over the years. I've come reasonably recently to this whole social media thing. Not so long ago, I thought a hashtag was a crumpled piece of Indonesian cooking foil. The topic on this particular session is extraordinarily lofty, and I think it attributes to social media a power or responsibility that I'm unconvinced that it may ever aspire to. I'm going to look at the sort of the higher end of journalism, and that's sort of the stuff that Margaret was talking about, of investigative work, of the sort of the dirty phone call. What I say to my people is, and there aren't that many of them because we're a struggling new media outfit, we're not doing this to make friends. And yet the common coin of a lot of sort of social media interaction is precisely that. It's around sort of building community and being touchy-feely, despite the fact that when that goes pear-shaped, it's one of the most nasty and sociopathic environments imaginable. The main issue that confronts real journalism, that sort of high-end, ugly phone call thing, is the collapse of business models devised in about 1830. But that was the point when people decided they would cut the prices of their newspapers and start charging for advertising and take advantage of the fact that they could get a mass market. It's those business models that then funded this golden age of inquiry and investigation. That informed generations of people, that underpinned the whole notion of our sort of democratic process. And it's those business models that we now know famously are in trouble. Margaret points out that, yes, we pay her, and that's a really strong differentiating factor. We are a kind of a new media success. You know, we struggle on, we exist, we've been going for 10 years. But we pay absolute rubbish. We certainly don't have the resources to employ half a dozen people in a small room at the back of a newspaper office with a licence to spend 3 months on something and fail. And that sort of licence, the sort of revenue that can equip that sort of effort is fundamental to the sort of journalism that is really important to all of us, the sort of journalism that can tell us something about our corporate structures, our political structures. Twitter, lots of other social media at the moment are a tool. They're a telephone. They're a good way of sourcing original information, but there are pitfalls in that too. This is information we've seen Iran quoted today, which is untested, unsubstantiated. Who are these people? How do we know what they're telling us is true? This notion of publish first, check later horrifies me. I mean, that if journalism has value, it's because it applies some standard to the information that it then promulgates amongst the readership or the community or the watchers. So I don't think social media is as yet equipped to save journalism, and I think journalism is in a dire strait and a difficult place. I don't know how these things will evolve. The models as yet aren't there. The notions haven't been yet developed as to how all this new stuff we see around us and that we use and that, is part of our day-to-day is going to come through at the other side and provide us with something that will sustain the sort of journalistic activity that's really fundamental to our sort of social health. Thank you.
Thank you, Jonathan. Jonathan Green. OK, we've got plenty of time for questions before morning tea. So, again, questions from the floor, questions from the online audience at Media 140 if you're twittering through to us. Yes, up here in the green. And just wave your hands around so I can see you.
Hi, my name's Vivian Winter. I'm a freelance journalist. I'm interested, I guess, to ask Margaret just your point before about new media improving your independence, but new media doesn't pay a lot. As a freelancer, I've been paid 50 cents a word by the Sydney Morning Herald. I doubt I would ever find a form of social media that would pay me that. Does anybody know of any journalists who are actually living well purely by publishing through online media?
I'm not sure if that's a panel for the audience or for the audience of the panel, but Margaret, have a go.
Well, there are journalists, of course, employed by mainstream media who publish entirely online, and they presumably are paid in line with others. For freelance journalists and bloggers and so on, the short answer is only a very few, and only one of them that I know of is in Australia, and it's questionable whether what he's doing is journalism. But I do think this will change. I do think it will change. I think Darren Rouse, the pro blogger, he does some journalism and some promotions and some of a lot of other things. But certainly something I'm discovering as a freelance journalist, book author, blogger, and sometime academic, is that the blog tends to lead to many other things, and you become, you sort of wear many different hats, and together you cobble together some sort of a living. Now, I think that may become a path for many people, and it's part of what I mean about journalism in the future being a practice rather than necessarily a profession. How we protect things like disinterest and independence through that is certainly one of the things that we're going to have to learn some lessons about and learn them fast.
That's a really big statement, isn't it? That's going to become a practice, less a profession and more a practice.
Yeah, that's right.
Because that goes to the sort of things that Robin was talking about do you learn skills of writing and broadcasting and all those sorts of things, interviewing, how to do good phone, for instance.
Although it should be said that there are plenty of people learning those right now, probably right in this very forum, in this room, there are people learning some of those skills right now. So
of course, and bringing them to the new social media, exactly. I'll take another question. Let's take another question from the floor, and if it is directed to one person on the panel, other panellists can, of course, answer too, so just chip in. Yes, over here.
My name's Margaret Van Heekeren from Charles Sturt University in Bathurst. My question ties in very much with both what Margaret and Jonathan were saying. And I'd just like to pose the question, have we perhaps come to a point in journalism history that we really need a redefinition of what the term journalism means, so that journalism comes to distinguish what Jonathan referred to as higher end or higher order journalism as opposed to what is merely media content and or information, and regardless of who produced it.
Okay, who's having a go?
Well, I think
Jonathan?
I definitely think we're at a point of, yes, extraordinary change. Margaret refers to this as a sort of a Gutenberg moment where there's a printing press sitting out the back. We haven't quite got round to working out the whole book thing yet. So we're not quite sure what to do with what we have. I think what's going to be really important in it, though, is to redefine this notion of what the journalist can do and what is actually good about an edited, mediated and sort of craftishly rigorous journalistic process that can actually bring something to a set of facts, observations or opinions, that those things on their own, which is sort of the tendency of the more crafty, bloggy or social media expression in journalism, doesn't quite carry. And so I think that, and it's interesting at a time when jobs are sort of going out of journalism, that the teaching of journalists is up. And I guess that's a good thing, because there will be people coming into the sort of new fora with this sort of battery of traditional journalistic skill. And I think that's going to be the really important thing to apply across new media platforms.
Let's just... we're going to keep going on this topic because someone's tweeted, the Bergerman, will social media fundamentally reconstitute what it means to be a journo, given that we're all news gatherers? Is that the change in definition? Journalist, news gatherer?
I think it will greatly change the practice of journalism. I'm not sure that it actually changes the essence of what journalism is yet, but certainly, absolutely, it changes the practice. As Mark was saying earlier on, the audience is in many more places than any group of journalists ever can be, so the audience will become practitioners of journalism. But I don't think that will ever entirely replace people who get paid for doing the dirty work. But certainly it's going to become much more fluid, and it will become a much more widely spread practice, I think.
Mike?
And not only going on inside the industrialised media. I think that's a really important thing. Journalism will be happening and will be being financed in many places other than mainstream media or the industrial media structures that grew up with the printing press.
Yeah, I agree to a large extent. But journalism is actually already a very broad church anyway. I mean, when we talk about journalism, we're probably thinking here in terms of people that write and report or broadcast, whereas in fact journalism includes all the people that are behind the scenes as well, the sub-editors and the editors and all the people that work in that area. But I think that I agree totally that the essence will continue, and that in fact it is a form of practice. I mean, you think back to some of the old arguments I can remember when I was starting out 20, 30 years ago. People were saying, is it a profession or is it not? Do we like doctors or people that actually go to university and study for long degrees and then practice and get registered or whatever it is. Well, I mean, there's a seepage between professional journalists and non-professional journalists. There always has been, There have always been people who've popped up and written for magazines or fanzines or done those sorts of things back when I was a kid. And I guess it'll just continue like that. It'll become a bit more challenging and interesting for those of us who consider ourselves professional journalists. But
Well, you'd have to think the balance would shift. I mean, when raw talent can just propel you into the debate.
I think one of the key differences is that you no longer need to persuade the magazine or whatever the outlet is to publish you. You can publish yourself. And you can use Twitter and social networking to find your audience. And that's a difference. That is a key difference.
And I think also, to go to that previous question, how do you get out there and earn a living as a journalist? Well, it comes down to talent again. Just what you said, it's being noticed. And I've noticed people out there, and we've actually invited them in, who've been out there on blogs. And we have people who we pay to blog now that we've noticed out there as bloggers.
Michael, there's a question directed to you here from one of the tweets. What is Fairfax's plan for recapturing its instant readership-based post-restricting access to its content?
Could you explain that to me, please?
Well, I guess it means... I'm not sure if it's referring to the point that the Murdoch theory of restricting access... You're going to have to pay access to the news, the Fin Review, you have to pay for the access to it
this is
online.
about the pay... This is a totally different discussion about the pay debate, is it?
Yeah, but I guess it's directed directly at you. It's about restricting access to all the information that's out there, and that seems counter to the push that social media
well, I
is.
mean, as we've said before, we're right behind Rupert Murdoch, About 3 steps. We don't have any. Speaking from my area, we don't have any sort of constructive plans right now. It's obviously an area we're reviewing. But as far as what we're doing right now, I can't see there being a serious business model around putting a wall around the stuff we're currently doing. Doing something new and fresh and different in another way, that's another story.
And the dollar may very well force us to that. Over here, and then over here.
Jonathan Holmes from Media Watch. Reflecting a little bit on what Robin said, it does seem to me that being a journalist in the olden days meant that you understood a concept called objectivity, an idea of impartiality, an idea that your own opinion did not matter and indeed should not be revealed, that what mattered was factually based reporting. It seems to me, and I'm very interested in the views on the panel, that what works in cyberspace is opinion, and the more rabid and the more trenchantly expressed, the better. Is there going to be room, and if there isn't, does it matter, for that notion of objective journalism?
Julie.
Yep. Anyone else want to have a go, since I hogged the stage for quite some time? No?
Well, now I try to tackle that one brief. It seems to me that there are 2 things militating against that. One of them is the sheer flood of PR pressure that we get, where if you listen to media, if you read stuff, you can see quite easily the fingerprints of some PR agency or some PR push. Someone wants this material to be public. And if you remember Ed Murrow's definition, news is something that someone somewhere wants to suppress. Now, the objectivity means the freedom, really, to be independent of that, and also to be independent of something which comes from the new social media, and that is noise. Being able, as you've said, to work out what is the essence of what's going on. Now, we've had a tremendous relationship in the ABC for a long time with the public. I've run something called Occam's Razor for 25 years, which is presented by people outside the ABC. Now, half the time I can't quite tell whether they're making it up. I often think we'll end up on Media Watch because we didn't have time to check the ultimate thing or even the first thing. And then I'm reminded by, what Kate Adie once said when she was dodging bullets in Tiananmen Square, asking to do the 3rd feed of the day by the BBC in London head office, saying, I haven't actually left my bedroom yet. And going out there to look is something that I actually need to do as a reporter. Now, that seems to me, to answer your question, to be the essence. Getting out there and seeing what's going on, and that also will include members of the public. And so building a relationship with the public, having the freedom to get out into the world so you've got actually something to report rather than something to recycle.
Isn't the value of the social media network so that there are so many eyes and ears out there? People are reporting from out there or reporting in the news. But the objectivity question is another issue, and also Jonathan's point there about, is it those with the egos, with the opinion, the narcissists, if you like, who are the hit out in these social media spaces?
Well, I would dispute the premise, actually, that journalists actually have understood objectivity. We certainly talk about it a lot, but have we actually understood it? Is it objective for a journalist to ring the 2 or 3 people they happen to have in their contact book and represent both sides of the story, rarely recognising that there might be more than 2? The potential for social media is that you contact a far wider number of people. I don't mean to dismiss it, though. I think there is an idea within objectivity which is very important, which is disinterested reporting. That is, reporting where your own opinion and your own stake, if you like, is not allowed to influence what gets reported and what doesn't. But in most newsrooms I've been part of, while the word objectivity is used a lot, it's rarely examined or interrogated, and I think most journalists would be hard put to it to tell you in any depth what they mean by it.
Is it a goal, though, to put aside? That might be the
enough
question.
narcissists in journalism.
I mean, I'm not quite sure that is utterly true, and in defence of some of the sort of industrial structures in journalism, is one of the things that a big newsroom with its checks and balances provides is the mechanisms for pulling up work that does not, that fails at that test, work that only has 2 sources. That in the olden days, people would write stuff which would go through processes of which those things would be exposed. And one of the deficiencies of self-publishing is that it has none of that rigour, and it has none of that editing input, and it has none of the questions asked of a piece that someone with an objective view of your work might ask, and force it to sort of raise the standard.
I agree with that at its best, the industrialised media and the virtue of the newsroom, disinterested reporting and reporting that looks at more than one side of a question, those have been the strengths of a good and well-working newsroom. They often don't work well, of course. What we're discovering now is the extent to which the audience can do that for us to some extent. And I don't know the answer to that, but it's an open question, I think.
Thousands of fact-checkers out there. Yes, there's a question here.
My name's Paula Gould. I'm a publicist in the United States and occasionally I'm hired to write for a couple of blogs. But somebody posed a question earlier about getting paid, and I wonder if the onus is really on the journalists to get paid, or if it's really on the publishing platforms. For example, when you are subscribed to a newspaper or magazine, you pay for that subscription, and that their funds to pay their journalists are often supplemented as well by the advertising. So when all of these papers and magazines came online, a lot of them are free instead of subscription. So I'm just curious I can't remember who it was, but it was somebody over there. If it was, when you talk about getting paid between bloggers and journalists, if it's more the onus of the media owner than it is the journalist to have a career in that field.
Anyone want
and get
to
paid for it and make a living for it.
Mike?
Sorry. I was just fascinated by the comment at the beginning that you said someone posted that question earlier when it was asked. The new language, I suppose. Look, it's a very contentious area. Obviously, I don't want to say too much about it, except that you just can't allow advertisers to have influence, and it's something that obviously you have to be very careful about.
But advertisers have always advertised in magazines and newspapers.
Sorry, could you repeat that?
Advertisers have always advertised in newspapers and magazines.
But normally have been, there's been a structural separation within those organisations between the commercial and the editorial, and that's been fundamental to their appeal to a marketplace. And, one of the risks of people getting out there and trying to make a living is that they may, step over more of those barriers, or that they may, push their content in a way which is aimed purely at its immediate appeal.
It's the trap of small publications often to ingratiate themselves to advertisers by offering free editorial and sort of thing.
Julie?
Just one issue that's connected to the debate around objectivity that we've only just started to have, and it's the term transparency, which is a bit of a buzzword with online publication. But I think that's a really important concept for journalists to consider as we look at reinvention as well, and that is the idea of declaring vested interests. This idea online is, if you're a blogger, you'll just lose followers because if you start to cross those barriers, if people start to perceive that you're pushing a barrow, for example, without a degree of, and I really think it's time we looked at objectivity, in terms of what it's so often come to represent, which is this idea of, a 50-50 balance between perspectives. I don't know how journalists covering the civil rights movement in the States were supposed to do that. Do we give 50% of airtime or the newspaper front page to the Ku Klux Klan? In South Africa, clearly there's a model which Mike might want to talk about around activist journalism, and that tradition exists elsewhere in the world as well. We've kind of, adopted this particularly American concept of objectivity in the way that it's been practiced in recent history in Australia. And so I think it's vital that we do separate ourselves from the barrows that are being pushed, from the opinions of the powerful, where they conflict with our rights and as citizens and democratic values and so on. But perhaps, Mike, do you want to...
I think we're going to wind up in a moment, so
sure.
I think it is time. Everyone probably needs a cup of tea. Basically, I think what we've had here is a panel that's set the platform for the discussions that are going to happen over the next 2 days. Questions for a start: what is journalism? And is it a profession, or is it just a practice, really, and is that changing? And the whole notion, Julie asked, talked about the loss of public trust in mainstream journalism, which is really sending people to the social media and encouraging the use of it. But then others will ask, is really the news you get on Twitter any more trustworthy? How can you check it? What is the fact-checking mechanism? What is the mechanism for checking or finding or presenting objectivity? There's a lot of questions. I'm sure you're going to be asking them and hearing a lot about them over the next couple of days. Right now, though, could you thank the panel? The first panel of the morning, Julie Pizzetti, Mike van Niekerk, Margaret Simons, Robin Williams and Jonathan Green.